I sat in the back row of my own son's wedding, while another man stood up and called my son the son I never had. I told myself, at the time, that it didn't matter where they'd seated me. I've had a long time since then to admit that it did. My name is Frank. I'm 67 now, and this is the story of my son Michael, and the 5 years of silence between us that I spent believing would eventually just resolve itself. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things, it turns out, though I didn't understand exactly how wrong, until it was far too late to fix any of it the way I once believed I still had time to understand how I ended up in that back row seat, listening to another man claim my role at my own son's wedding. You have to go back 5 years earlier, to a laugh, a car ride, and a sentence I never should have said. Michael and I were close once, genuinely close. Not just the performative closeness families sometimes fake for holiday photos. He worked beside me summers throughout high school at the small home renovation business I built from nothing, starting as a solo contractor in my 20s and growing it, over 3 decades, into a company with 11 employees and a decent, honest reputation across our county. I taught him to frame a wall, to read a level, to talk to a difficult client without losing his patience. I assumed, the way fathers sometimes foolishly assume things about the future, that he'd eventually take the business over from me. He didn't. And that, on its own, was never the actual problem. I want to be clear about that, because for a long time I let people believe, including myself, that our estrangement was about him choosing a different career. It wasn't. Michael went to college for finance, built a genuinely successful career at an investment firm in the city, and I was proud of him for it. Or at least I told myself I was, in the moments I managed to set my own disappointment aside long enough to actually feel proud, rather than just performing it. The real fracture happened the year he got engaged to Sarah, a woman from a wealthy family whose father owned a chain of car dealerships across 3 states. I liked Sarah, genuinely. She was warm, sharp, clearly loved my son. The problem wasn't her. The problem was what happened at the engagement dinner when Sarah's father, a man named Douglas, made a comment about my business. Nothing especially cruel on its face, just an offhand remark about small operations like yours during a conversation about investment opportunities. And Michael laughed along with it. I don't think Michael fully understood, in that moment, what that laugh cost him with me. It probably felt like nothing to him. A small, easy social laugh at a dinner table. The kind of reflexive thing you do to keep a conversation moving smoothly with your future father-in-law. But something in me, some old wound about spending 30 years building something honest with my own 2 hands, while men like Douglas built empires through other people's money, cracked open in a way I didn't fully process or communicate well at the time. I said something to Michael in the car afterward, something bitter, something about how I guessed his father's small operation had paid for his college education and his car and his apartment, but apparently that didn't count for much once he found people with real money to laugh along with. It wasn't fair what I said. I understood that even as I was saying it, and I said it anyway, because I was hurt and I didn't know how to say that plainly instead of turning it into an accusation. Michael didn't yell back. That was almost worse in a way. He just went quiet, dropped me off at my house and said, "I'll talk to you later, Dad," in a tone that I understood, even then, meant something closer to, "I don't know when I'll be ready to talk to you again." The wedding, 8 months later, was where the distance between us became something the whole extended family could see plainly. I was there. I want to be clear about that, because there's a version of this story where a father simply doesn't show up. And that's not what happened. I was invited, I attended, I even gave a brief toast at Michael's mother's insistence. But I was seated 3 tables back, not at the head table where a father of the groom might typically sit, and Douglas, Sarah's father, gave the primary toast of the evening, the one where he called Michael the son I never had, a phrase that landed in my chest like a physical blow, delivered, I have to believe, without any real awareness of how it would sound to the actual father sitting 3 tables back. I didn't say anything about it that night. I smiled, I hugged Michael, I told him I was proud of him and meant it even through the hurt. But something between us had shifted into a kind of permanent politeness after that. The careful, distant kind you maintain with someone you love, but don't quite know how to actually talk to anymore. Over the following years, our contact narrowed to holiday phone calls that rarely lasted more than 10 minutes, a handful of birthday cards, one stiff dinner a year that always felt more like an obligation than a reunion. I told myself every single year that there was still time to fix it, that eventually one of us would find the right moment, the right words, and the distance would close the way it had opened, gradually without either of us fully noticing until it was too late. I didn't know, on the morning of my 66th birthday, sitting alone at my kitchen table with a phone that hadn't rung yet from my only son, that I had less time left to fix things than I believed I did. The chest pain started about 3 weeks after that quiet phone call-free birthday, a tightness I initially dismissed as heartburn, then as stress, then, when it happened twice more over the following 10 days, as something I finally admitted needed a doctor's attention. The diagnosis when it came was congestive heart failure, complicated by an aortic valve condition my cardiologist explained had likely been developing quietly for years, probably worsened by decades of physically demanding work and a family history of heart disease I'd never taken particularly seriously. The prognosis wasn't immediately dire. With proper treatment, valve replacement surgery, careful management, my doctor estimated I could reasonably expect many more years. But the surgery itself carried real risk given my age and the specific complications they'd found, and for the first time in my life, I found myself sitting in a doctor's office genuinely confronting the possibility that I might not have unlimited time left to fix the things I'd spent 5 years, telling myself I still had time to fix. I called Michael the same evening I got the diagnosis. It was the first time I called him outside of a scheduled holiday check-in in almost 2 years, and I could hear the surprise in his voice when he picked up. "Dad, everything okay?" I told him about the diagnosis, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to lean too hard on the moment in a way that might feel manipulative rather than honest. He was quiet for a long moment on the other end of the line. The same kind of quiet I remembered from the car ride after that engagement dinner 5 years earlier, except this silence felt different. Heavier. Scared maybe, in a way his voice hadn't sounded in years. "I'll come up this weekend," he said. "We should talk. Really talk, Dad. I think we both let this go on for way too long." I want to tell you that weekend visit happened the way we both apparently intended it to. It didn't. Not because either of us changed our minds, but because of the specific cruel timing that life sometimes deals out without any regard for the conversations people are finally, belatedly ready to have. 2 days before Michael was scheduled to drive up, my cardiologist called with urgent news. An echocardiogram from my most recent appointment showed the valve deteriorating faster than initially expected, creating a risk profile that meant surgery needed to happen almost immediately rather than on the more gradual timeline we'd originally discussed. I was admitted to the hospital that same evening for pre-surgical preparation, with the operation itself scheduled for 2 days later, the exact weekend Michael had planned to drive up for what he called really talking. He came straight to the hospital instead. I remember him walking into my hospital room, still in his work clothes, having apparently left his office the moment I called with the news, driving 3 hours without stopping. He sat down in the chair beside my bed, and for a moment, neither of us said anything at all. "I've been rehearsing what I wanted to say to you for 2 days, he finally said, his voice tight in a way I'd never heard from my adult son. "About the wedding, about Douglas's toast, about laughing at that comment about your business 5 years ago, when I should have said something instead. I've had 5 years to say I'm sorry for all of it, and I kept telling myself there'd be more time to figure out exactly the right way to say it." I reached over and took his hand, the IV line pulling slightly at my wrist as I did. "You don't have to figure out the right way right now," I said. "You're here. That's what actually matters." We talked for almost 2 hours that evening, more honestly than we had in 5 years. About the engagement dinner, about the wedding seating, about Douglas's toast, about my own bitterness that I'd never fully explained to him, about his own guilt that he'd apparently been carrying silently for years without knowing how to bring it up. It felt for those 2 hours like we were finally closing the distance we'd both let grow for far too long. Out of pride, out of awkwardness, out of the mistaken belief that there would always be more time later to say the things that actually mattered. The surgery was scheduled for 6 the next morning. Sometime after midnight, half asleep, I felt someone gently pulling my blanket back up over my shoulder where it had slipped. I opened my eyes just enough to see Michael standing there in the dim light, tucking it in the careful, clumsy way you'd fix a blanket on someone you hadn't done this for since they were small. He didn't say anything. He just noticed my old work boots sitting by the hospital chair, still crusted with drywall dust from a job site I'd left in a hurry 2 days earlier, and he picked them up and set them neatly by the door instead, like he needed his hands to do something useful while the rest of him sat with nothing to do but wait. Michael stayed at the hospital overnight, sleeping upright in that same uncomfortable chair beside my bed, the way I imagine I once did for him during some childhood illness he probably doesn't even remember. What neither of us knew, walking into that operating room the next morning, was that the surgery would reveal complications far more serious than my cardiologist had initially projected. Complications that would turn Michael's 5 years of quiet regret into something he'd carry for the rest of his life, whether or not he ever got the chance to fully say everything he'd finally, belatedly, found the courage to say. I want to tell you honestly, because I think honesty is the only thing that actually makes a story like this mean anything. I did not die on that operating table. I know how a story like this often goes, in the kind of tale people tell to make a point about regret and time running out. But that's not exactly what happened to me, and I think what actually happened matters more, in its own way, than the version where a father simply doesn't survive. The surgery revealed a second valve complication. The initial imaging hadn't fully captured, extending the operation by nearly 4 hours and requiring a more invasive repair than originally planned. I came out of it alive, but weakened in a way that required almost 3 weeks in the hospital, followed by a difficult, uncertain recovery that, for a period of about 10 days, genuinely could have gone either direction, according to my doctor's careful, guarded language during that stretch. Michael didn't leave, not for those first 10 uncertain days, not really at all over the following 3 weeks, taking an extended leave from his firm that I later learned had required some difficult conversations with his managing partner. He sat beside that hospital bed the way he had that first night, working quietly on his laptop when I was sleeping, talking to me about nothing in particular when I was awake and strong enough to talk, slowly, patiently, rebuilding something between us that 5 years of distance had let atrophy, almost to nothing. It was during one of those long, quiet hospital afternoons, about 2 weeks into my recovery, that Michael told me the thing that I think mattered more than almost anything else he said during that entire ordeal. I kept thinking during those 4 extra hours in the waiting room about all the years I told myself there'd be time later, he said, staring at his hands rather than at me. I regretted not saying something to Douglas at that dinner 5 years ago. I regretted the wedding seating. I want you to know I fought for you to be at the head table, and Sarah's mother overruled it, and I was too much of a coward to push back the way I should have. I regretted every single holiday phone call I let stay short and easy instead of actually asking how you were doing. And I sat in that waiting room truly believing, for a few hours, that I might have run out of time to ever tell you any of it. You didn't run out of time, I said. You're here. This time, he said. But I don't want to keep believing there's always going to be a next time. I don't want to almost lose you again before I remember that. I'm writing this almost a year after that surgery now, fully recovered, back to most of my normal activities, with my cardiologist cautiously optimistic about my long-term outlook. Koppel and I talk every week now, real conversations, not the 10-minute holiday check-ins we'd settled for during those 5 distant years. He and Sarah had their first child 4 months ago, a little girl they named after my late wife, Michael's mother. A gesture that meant more to me than he probably fully understands, even now. I don't know if Michael ever properly resolved things with Douglas about that engagement dinner comment, or whether that particular thread of the story matters as much as I once believed it did. What I do know is that my son spent 5 years regretting a laugh at a dinner table, a wedding seating arrangement, a series of short phone calls that could have been longer, and that regret nearly stayed buried, unspoken, right up until a hospital waiting room forced him to confront how close he'd actually come to running out of time to say any of it. Months later, Douglas actually reached out to me directly, something I hadn't expected and didn't ask for. He came by the house one afternoon, a little awkward in a way I'd never seen from him before, and apologized for the comment at the engagement dinner and for that son I never had toast at the wedding. He admitted he'd never meant to drive a wedge between a father and his son, that he'd simply never stopped to think about how his words might land on the actual father sitting 3 tables back. I don't know that we'll ever be close, but I appreciated that he said it, and I think it mattered to Michael more than either of us let on. He didn't run out of time in the end, not quite, but he came close enough that neither of us takes that closeness for granted anymore. I think about that empty back row seat at his wedding sometimes still, and about all the years afterward when I told myself, over and over, that there would always be more time later to fix what had quietly broken between us. I was right, as it turned out, barely, and only because a surgery that could have gone very differently happened to go the way it did. Not everyone gets that same narrow window back. I think about that too more than I probably should. And I think, if there's anything actually worth taking from a story like ours, it's simply this: don't wait for a hospital bed, or an operating room, or any other unexpected reminder of how limited your remaining time together with someone actually is, before you finally say the things that matter. Say them now, while there's still an ordinary, unremarkable afternoon left to say them in.